Hi, good evening. This is Gene from Listening In Radio, call sign KB9001 SWL, KB9001 MWDX, SSB, and of course my ham radio call sign WN9ZWC. And this is my 110th show, so this is going to be my 110th video log entry into Listening In Radio. And the date today is September 5th, 2023. UTC time is 21:47. And welcome to show 110. In other shows, I've talked a lot about radios and antennas and getting on the air, both talking and monitoring. You know, particularly a lot of monitoring, because I do like a lot of monitoring. And but I want to just put some rubber on the road, so to speak, with the radio hobby here. So I want to talk about what's happening out on the airwaves right now and what news stories are breaking right now, and things that are of interest. So here on Listening In Radio, I just did a short segment. My last show was on using a random wire antenna to monitor shortwave, and I got a really great question from a YouTube member, and his username is Irvin Soto 8047, and he asked this. He asked if he could use a random wire antenna to hear air traffic control on high frequency, or HF. And HF is used primarily in transatlantic crossings. There's a place on the East Coast called Gander Center, or Gander Radio, and they communicate with the aircraft making the transatlantic flight. I used to hear them quite a bit on the radio, but I haven't heard them in a while. But he asked if he could use the type of antenna that I displayed in my last video to monitor HF air communications. And I haven't heard it for a while. I haven't. The last time I heard Gander Center was when I lived in Illinois, and I had a Sangean 818, and I used my Sangean with just a whip, and I used to hear them pretty clearly, but I haven't heard them in a long time. But for those of you who are interested, there's a website, and it's called liveatc.net. And I looked there, and they put the frequencies for Gander on there. I'm assuming they're still in operation, but I'm not 100% sure because I haven't heard them in quite a long time. But the first frequency that they listed for HF communications was 6604, and that's where I used to hear Gander Center all the time, was on 6604. But the frequencies are as follows for HF communications for that, and the frequencies are 6604, 6577, 8846, 8918, and 11330 kilohertz. And they also operate on VHF, and if you go to liveatc.net, they have all those frequencies there. And like I said, it's been many years since I heard Gander Center, and I did check those frequencies using the antenna that I had for a short while, and I did not hear any communications coming from there. But being in the center of the country, it might be more difficult to hear them. So if anybody has any further information on how to better receive, say, Gander or HF communications on air, if you could please post it in the comments section in this video, I'd really appreciate it quite a bit. And this also brought up another story that I ran into, which was really interesting, and I kind of tripped over it by accident. But I ran into another really interesting story on military.com. And for those of you who monitor out there, and you do milcoms or military communications, I'd like to hear from you on this one too. Because and this story came from military.com, which is, by the way, a very reputable website. And the story had to do with a new highly technical aircraft called the TR-3B, which is rumored to be powered by an anti-gravity system. Well, that's pretty interesting because I have some details from the past on that. And it's rumored to be an anti-gravity aircraft related to the Aurora project, according to the story. And this is what the story said. This is a quote from the story. It says, "It doesn't exist officially. It uses highly pressurized mercury to accelerate by nuclear energy to produce plasma that creates a field of anti-gravity around the ship. Conventional thrusters located in the tips of the craft allow it to perform all manner of rapid high-speed maneuvers along three axes. Interestingly, the plasma generated also reduces the radar signatures significantly, so it will be almost invisible on radar and remain undetected. This literally means that it can go to any country it likes without being detected by air traffic control or air defense systems. Well, the story kind of took me back a few years because in 1980, or no, I think it was 1979, I apologize. So it was about 1979. This is where it started for me. I was stationed in Alameda, California in the military. And one day I walked outside of my house and I looked up in the sky right over my house, and there was this gigantic rectangular aircraft hanging over my house. And about 100 people saw it because it was over a heavily populated area. In fact, I went and looked on the National UFO Reporting Center webpage, and they have documents from that time, and people had actually reported to them what they had saw. So there was multiple witnesses, like I said, probably hundreds of witnesses, and apparently I saw it when it stopped over my head, was completely silent, rotated, and kind of slowly moved over the horizon. But the last people to see it said in their reports that they saw it take off at a very high rate of speed out of the area. But with that said, it's just an interesting story. So in relation to that, in about 1990, I ran into a story, and it was published in Popular Communications magazine, and it was under their MILCOM, or Military Communications section, which did most of its stories on monitoring military aircraft. And the article pertained to a project called Tacit Blue and Aurora, which is connected to the story that military.com just did, because they mentioned Aurora in the article. I also, during the same time, was a very avid listener to Art Bell's Coast to Coast program, which was a syndicated show on all of AM radio. They had the midnight slot all over the United States. You could hear them on multiple radio stations throughout the United States from every country. When they said coast to coast, it was from California to the East Coast. They had many syndicated. And Art Bell, by the way, was a ham radio operator, and his call sign was W6OBB. And he would take calls on open lines. And one night he had a former military person, or said they were a former military person, that had witnessed an anti-gravity aircraft being used in anti-drug operations in South America. And then, of course, I ran into the story on military.com, and it just connected a lot of dots together for me, and kind of. Okay, apologize. The video got interrupted. But anyway, if anybody has any information on any MILCOM contacts, I'd appreciate if you could post them in the comments section below this video, because I'd like to hear what else people are hearing. So from there, let's talk about ham radio a little bit. So what's been happening in the ham radio area? Well, just one thing I wanted to note, and I'm sure a lot of other ham radio operators throughout the country saw the same thing with summer propagation. We had a really great opening on VHF here, a very nice opening in central Iowa. In fact, I spoke to one ham radio station. His call sign was Kilo Echo 0 India Zulu Echo KE0IZE from Norway, Iowa. And I talked to him. He was from Norway, Iowa, which is 101 miles from my location, so there was a great contact. I also belong to a Discord page called the Iowa Radio Operators Discord page, and I talked to KC0UJC there, and he told me that he also made many contacts during this VHF opening, which was quite a bit of fun, actually. I like to see VHF do that. So, okay, from there I want to go into a little bit of loggings and what's to be heard. So a lot of people are asking me, well, what's going on with shortwave? Is shortwave very viable? Is AM radio viable? Because there's questions about the direction that both those mediums and both those bands are going into. Well, I'll tell you, both AM radio and shortwave are very much alive and well. So I just want to go over some of my loggings real quick, so you can see what I'm seeing and hear what I'm hearing. So to speak. Okay, so some unusual stations, or not unusual, some distant stations from me that I've made contact with since March. Just a handful here. There's WBAP from Fort Worth, Texas, at 820 kilohertz, and I talked to them at 0430. Heard them at 0430 UTC, and stand by here. Try and get that right so I can call out some of these stations here. And there's WOAI in San Antonio, Texas, which was a 5.9. They're around 1200 kilohertz. That was a good good contact, or not a good contact, but a good monitoring. WBBM from Chicago, also 559, and they're at 780 kilohertz. And let me see. This is an unusual one. It's 6105 kilohertz. No, I apologize. Is that 60? No, that is not correct. That is shortwave. But that was a 6105 kilohertz. WHAS was the station that logged. Another AM station, medium wave, was KDFT Denver. It's 760 kilohertz. I monitored them at 0320 UTC. And let me see, WGN out of Chicago, which, by the way, they sent me a very nice QSL for my signal report, so greatly appreciated. And they're on 720, AM 720 kilohertz, and I monitored them at 0210 UTC. Of course, WSM, the big transmitter down in Nashville, Tennessee, country music all the time. I monitored them. They're on 650 kilohertz. I monitored that station at 0340 UTC. KOA Denver, another big station, on 850 kilohertz, and I monitored them at 5.9 at, let me see, that was at 0350 UTC. And let's talk about some shortwave stations. Of course, the big player on the block on shortwave right now is WWCR, and they transmit a lot of different programming. And I caught them at 93.95 kilohertz, and that's generally where I hear them, is at 93.95 at 0055 UT. And I was listening to my favorite radio guy, Glenn Hauser, and I was listening to Glenn Hauser's World of Radio. If you don't know about that, check it out. It's good stuff. I'll be posting that on some of that on the Discord page so people can hear that as well. And let me see. Here's a good one. This is an AM one. I just want to throw this in there. CFZM, which is called Zoomer Radio. And Zoomer Radio can be found at 750 kilohertz, and all they do is play oldies music. They're a great station. They're a 50,000 watt blowtorch out of Ontario. So look for that one on 750 kilohertz, and check it out. It's worth the check out. So let me see here. Let's talk about some shortwave. And recently I monitored Radio Havana, Cuba at 6,000 megahertz, where they're at pretty regularly. In fact, I sent them a signal report, and I've heard Havana, Cuba for many, many, many years, and I decided to reach out to see if I can get a QSL. And I did send a QSL, but I had a really hard time finding an address for Havana, Cuba, Radio Havana. But I want to put the address out here so other operators have it. And that address is as follows. It is Infanta, INTFANTA, Infanta, number 105. E is in Edward, S is in Sierra, Q is in Quebec, period, 256 TO, Piso, PISO, AP, 6240, La Habana, Cuba. Okay. If you need that address again, just drop me a note in the low bar or in the comments, and I'll get you that address. Okay. Okay, I copied Radio New Zealand at 1572 megahertz, and that was on 8/12. That was August 12th at 0425 UTC. I'm glad to still hear Radio Netherlands out here. That was awesome. I'm sorry, Radio New Zealand. It was awesome to hear them out here. It's still on the radio. Of course, WRMI at 5950 megahertz. Again, Radio New Zealand, I caught them on the 10th of August at 15720. Shortwave. And I caught Saudi Radio at 15170 kilohertz at 0350 UTC. That was back in April. So they're out there. You just have to check the schedules and put your ear on. There's one. This is one that I hear regularly now. It's NHK World Japan, and I heard it. I used my SDR. It was so the signal was so clear because my SDR isn't all that great, but I was able to pick it up on my SDR, and they're at 6105 kilohertz. Oh, this is another one which was very interesting. Was Myanmar Radio. I heard them at 9730 kilohertz, and I tried to send a signal report to them for a QSL card, and the mail that I sent, my signal report was sent back to me by the post office saying that service to Myanmar was suspended, probably for diplomatic reasons. So I still hung on to the card. I think it's pretty interesting, but probably I'm wondering if I might see the same thing coming back from Cuba, because I'm not sure their relations are so good. But we'll see what happens. You can always try. I always say try. So. Okay, and of course BBC. We're still hearing BBC. I heard them on shortwave at 12094 back in March. I'm looking all the way back at March for that one, but I understand that BBC is discontinuing their long wave service, and there's a little bit of blowback from that. So we'll see how that goes. And I heard that on Glenn Hauser's World of Radio, and they're imploring BBC to stay on here. Okay, well, I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Hope you enjoyed this segment of it. I thought I'd do something a little bit different rather than talking technical stuff. I want you to know what's out on the airways, and we'll do some programs about this from time to time, so you can kind of connect with what's happening out on the airways and what's going on. I also really recommend that you take a look at Glenn Hauser's World of Radio, and there's a lot of information on there. Listen to his podcast too. I think he does great podcasts, and he tells us what's going on out in the radio realm. So, okay, this is Gene from Listening in Radio. Thanks for taking a few minutes with me. Take care.